Hello everyone, thanks for joining us. I'm Jess from the Active Learning team. I'm in Canberra today, which is Ngunnawal country. I'd like to acknowledge the Ngunnawal people, who are the traditional custodians of the land where I live and work. I pay my respects to Ngunnawal elders past and present, and to all First Nations people of this country who have occupied and cared for this continent continuously for over 65,000 years. This land always was and always will be Aboriginal land. And I want to take this opportunity to acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded and treaties have never been signed. I'd also like to acknowledge and welcome all First Nations peoples who may be joining us today. And indeed, welcome to everyone who is joining us for this webinar. Very excited to have the speakers that we do have today for this event. Before we get to introducing them though, I'm just going to run through some quick housekeeping for the event. The first thing to note is that we will be recording this session. I also want to let everybody know that you're automatically on mute in this session, but you can test your audio by using the audio settings option next to the microphone icon. And if you do want to ask our amazing panelists some questions, you can use the Q&A function. That's just by selecting Q&A in your menu panel. You can also use the chat function if you would like to pop your questions in there, add any comments, or contact anybody directly. And that's all about housekeeping. So without any further ado, I will hand over to Joshua.
Aloha. Thank you so much, Jess, and thank you, AFSED, for this exciting moment to be able to share about the VLR movement in the Pacific. Today, we'll be looking at sharing possibilities in the Pacific, VLRs to raise ambition for a decade of action. And today we'll be looking at imminent issues facing island communities that will be explored, and we'll bring together civil society practitioners and city policymakers to partner together. Discussing specific steps at the sub-regional level, the speakers will offer municipal models that can be transferred to other communities and cities in the Pacific, as well as scaled up for national actions to achieve the 2030 agenda. Hawaii and Tasmania are both island states, part of the larger developed economies, and are at different points in their sustainability journeys. We'll learn from Hawaii's transformative tactics to the UN 2030 Sustainable Development Goals, and about bright spots from Tasmania that are helping to shape the transition to a low carbon and sustainable future. Through exchange and exploration, the two municipalities will share promising practices in community power and local decision-making. Through a juxtaposition on the journey for justice, there'll be a sharing of simple steps and potential scalable solutions in the Pacific. I'm Joshua Cooper, and I'm fortunate enough to be the director of the Hawaii Institute for Human Rights and teach at the University of Hawaii, and a proud partner of Hawaii Green Growth. I am so excited to be able to welcome all of the speakers today who really bring a lifetime of experience and are doing some of the most cutting edge work focusing on cities. I would really call it municipal multilateralism, really bringing in some ideas that energize the UN at the global level by bringing the vision from the ground to that space. And really it's all based exactly as Jess began on Indigenous values and the host culture, and really building on that amazing model of sustainability, as well as a deep connection to our Aina and our earth. I would like to now share with you a brief video introducing the Aloha Plus dashboard and Hawaii's first statewide voluntary local review. This year, the dashboard informed the release of Hawaii's first statewide voluntary local review, and this unprecedented report is the first comprehensive statewide SDG review from any US state and quantifies Hawaii's sustainability progress with over 6 years of collected data. This milestone takes stock of collective progress as well as shared challenges that can not only be solved by one group, one sector, or one administration, and requires diverse partnership and innovation. And I'd just like to add one point that it's been so exciting to see Hawaii meeting at the high-level political forum this summer with the Voluntary Local Review Lab and speaking for over an hour, sharing all the exciting action taking place from the public-private partnership, and then continuing that conversation at the UN General Assembly 75th anniversary, and really sharing the results of the first Voluntary Local Review Lab across the country. I've now showed the film. Thank you. Hope you enjoyed that video. It does inspire me still. I know I use the VLR in the report as a teaching tool in my classes already on global futures, as well as comparative politics, but also a transformative technique to engage with our policymakers as well as local businesses. I'd now like to introduce Celeste Connors. Celeste Connors is Executive Director of the Hawaii Green Growth Local 2030 Hub. She previously served as the Director for Environment and Climate Change at the National Security Council and National Economic Council in the White House, where she helped shape the administration's climate and energy policies, including the Sustainable Development Goals. Prior to joining the White House, Celeste served as a diplomat in Saudi Arabia, Greece, and Germany. She was a faculty member at the Johns Hopkins University School of Advanced International Studies, SAIS, in the Energy Resources and Environmental Program, and is a senior fellow at the East-West Center. And Celeste grew up in Kailua, Oahu, just around the corner from where I grew up here. Celeste, thank you so much for your opening remarks.
Thank you, Josh, and aloha. I also just want to thank the Australian Council for International Development for convening us today and for the opportunity to share. I'm just delighted to be on the panel with the University of Hawaii and the Global Island Partnership and the Tasmania Way. Because what's fascinating here, and especially as we hear all the things that Tasmania is looking at from a sustainability perspective, is that we're all sort of major island economies. I also liked the comment, Josh, that you made before about this kind of new municipal multilateralism, I think is what you said. So I think this panel really demonstrates the power of local leadership, and against the backdrop of what we need really to move the dial on some of the most pressing challenges, including, green growth recovery, looking at the backdrop of COVID, recognizing that many of our members of our community are actually suffering really immediately from COVID, from a loss of livelihoods, especially in an island context with disrupted supply chains, disrupted tourism, and all kinds of things that are directly affecting our economy, our workforce. It's really critically important that we can have these types of conversations to say, how do local frameworks, local sustainability frameworks actually create a framework for recovery, in our case for green growth recovery, and that actually roll up to the broader global SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals. Just quickly by way of background, is that what we'll talk about briefly is the Aloha Plus Challenge. Let me first start with that. As it was noted at the beginning of this discussion, it's grounded in host culture, indigenous knowledge, and island values. He nohona ai oia, a culture of sustainability. And it's a commitment to 6 consensus-based statewide sustainability goals that actually cut across economic, social, and environmental sectors. And it has actually received unparalleled political support locally. The state legislature passed the Aloha Plus Challenge resolution in 2014. The governor, mayors, 4 mayors in Hawaii, the Office of Hawaiian Affairs, and our congressional delegation and local state legislature all signed a joint commitment to the Aloha Plus Challenge SDGs as a local framework to deliver against the global goals. Now, if we're to think about how we got to where we are, what is our genealogy? It's actually grounded in sort of the community of folks that we actually have here on the call. The Aloha Plus Challenge itself was inspired by other island efforts, really facilitated by the Global Island Partnership. And we're delighted that we'll be hearing from Executive Director Kate Brown later in the program. The Micronesia Challenge was a commitment to steward land and water resources, time-bound goals with a high level of political commitment. That in turn inspired something called the Caribbean Challenge. And then Hawaii was similarly inspired by the Micronesia Challenge and the Caribbean Challenge, and we launched our Aloha Plus Challenge. So right there, you have a really elegant example of islands inspiring other islands, islands understanding the local context within which we work, the challenges and also the opportunities. Hawaii Green Growth's origin story starts in 2011. Hawaii Green Growth is a public-private partnership, and it's committed to advancing economic, social, environmental priorities. In fact, it was inspired by an APEC summit that was convened in Honolulu, Hawaii in 2008. And at that time, I think we'll recall, we were actually recovering or emerging from the 2008 financial crisis. And it's when the major economies got together. The major economies, including Australia, the United States, France, Germany, and others, and said, we need to recover from this recession in a different way. We need to have a green growth recovery. And that's actually the origin of Hawaii Green Growth, is actually an economic recovery strategy at its core. And now almost a decade later, we are very well positioned to help Hawaii emerge stronger, more diversified, more equitable, and more resilient. We convened statewide our public and private sector partners to identify joint areas for action, including shared measures, policy priorities and projects, and innovative financial mechanisms to drive implementation on our goals and on the global goals. So last year, as part of the Local 2030 initiative launched by the Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations, Hawaii was recognized as a Local 2030 hub, asked to help scale our model in a locally and culturally appropriate way with other island economies, which is work that we're undertaking with GLISPA, and we'll talk more about that. Hawaii, as Josh noted, is the first state to present a comprehensive statewide voluntary local review. It's a snapshot in time. It's our 2020 benchmark data. It includes all 4 counties. And as I said, we are actually following in the great examples of municipalities, of city leaders such as Los Angeles and New York, Bristol and Helsinki, and others around the world that have actually reported on their progress. And so we've learned so much from them, and we're so delighted to see the leadership around the world. What makes, I think, Hawaii's effort unique is that it is truly a statewide effort with all 4 of our mayors together with the governor and our public and private sector partners. It was produced by the Local 2030 Hub in collaboration with our network partners from across government, business, and civil society. And the report covers 6 years of data. And the metrics were actually co-developed by the partners statewide across all the counties. Now, what's unique, I think, about what we have to share is that we have the Aloha Plus Challenge dashboard, which is on the state.gov website, and it tracks progress over the period of the time that it was developed over 3 years, the metrics and indicators with input from over 500 statewide stakeholders, and it's iterative. So as we've seen with the SDGs, as we've seen in other places, you measure what matters. So we had to go out and find out what matters to our community. And that's actually what informed our metrics. And so newly enhanced this year, I should say, the dashboard has just migrated to an Esri-based platform. We're delighted to be working with Esri. So we have increased visualizations and interactivity, mapping to improve user experience, and something that reinforces our commitment to continue to take active steps towards our 2030 goals. The dashboard is used as a policy tool by public and private sector partners and civil society partners to inform decision-making, notably the state legislature, climate commissions, and reports and publications across the Hawaii sustainability priorities. Actually, recently, a recent example that I like to share is that having the dashboard in place prior to COVID created a gathering place for Hawaii's data sets that emerged at the start of the pandemic. And this included metrics on social distancing abilities, volunteer response efforts, and public health preparedness. So it was actually during this time, the dashboard also identified over 200 local projects and investment opportunities aligned with the Aloha Plus Challenge that this could support a green growth recovery for Hawaii. We identified over 10,000 jobs actually from this survey that we have now online, and really the opportunity to invest over $500 million of recovery funding that could actually immediately pay for green growth jobs. The results of this data helped launch and facilitate the Aloha Connects Innovation Program with our environmental agencies here. And this actually allocates Federal CARES Act funding to connect and train displaced workers with new job opportunities in green industries and innovation sectors. So this is very exciting for us. I should also note one other thing before I'd like to just share a brief video, is that, we are also working very closely with our businesses. Hawaii's businesses are deeply connected to our community. In fact, I would say that they actually serve as anchor institutions. They have actually been hit also by COVID. They are being very mindful of ESG, environment, social, and governance aspects of how they can help contribute to a COVID recovery. And they're actually committed to tracking progress on that. We are actually working with our businesses through something called the Sustainability Business Forum, which includes 24 of our CEOs from our utilities and banks to infrastructure companies. The diversity of businesses are represented that are actually now part of the Global Compact, so that they have joined the over 10,000 businesses that have committed to 10 priorities and also to the SDGs. And so they are actually trying to affect change in their workplace, supporting the employees, corporate buying power, and the communities within which they work. So it's actually very inspiring to us. We are working very closely with them on their ESG reporting. Now, what I would like to do, I'm looking forward to our panel. So why don't we just move over to share some remarks from Congressman Ed Case, who is a very close partner of ours, and we enjoy working with him. Let me hand that over now for our video.
Aloha, and mahalo for the opportunity to join you on Voices from the Pacific at the United Nations High-Level Political Forum 2020. I regret that I can't join you live and in person for what I know will be an informative and empowering discussion. As U.S. Representative for Hawaii's 1st Congressional District, I am proud to represent a state that has led the way in pursuing implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals and the United Nations 2030 Agenda. Last year, I joined other leaders of Hawaii at our state capitol to sign Hawaii Green Growth's Malama Mandate, committing ourselves to take active steps in implementing the Sustainable Development Goals and accelerate island-led solutions to the pressing global challenges we face. However, in pursuing the Sustainable Development Goals, Hawaii must not go it alone. I often remind my colleagues in Congress that the United States is a Pacific nation, but nowhere is that more obvious and important than in Hawaii. We are a member of the Pacific Ohana and part of an even larger family of islands across the world that are confronting similar challenges with regards to sustainable development. Hawaii is our bridge to the Pacific and to Asia, and we can and should play a dynamic role in engaging and leading, when possible, on issues of shared interest. In Congress, I am proud to have taken an active role in promoting greater U.S. attention to the Pacific Islands. Last year, I co-founded the first ever Congressional Pacific Islands Caucus to serve as the focal point for greater discussion and understanding of the importance of this region, the challenges it faces, and the common interests and values we share. I co-chair this bipartisan caucus with my colleagues Congressman Don Young, Congressman Brad Sherman, Congressman Ted Yoho, and Congressman Ami Bera. Our top priority as a caucus is to advance a comprehensive U.S. foreign policy in the region that is responsive to the challenges faced by the countries and peoples of the Pacific Islands. That foreign policy will be reflected in a bill that we will soon introduce, along with my fellow caucus co-chairs, the Boosting Long-Term U.S. Engagement in the Pacific, or Blue Pacific Act. In naming this bill, I wanted to pay tribute to the concept of the Blue Pacific endorsed by leaders of the Pacific Islands Forum. This shared identity recognizes the challenges we face together and the need for collective action to address and overcome these challenges. Our Blue Pacific Act will tackle issues like maritime security, trade, development, healthcare, education, human rights, the rule of law, environmental protection, and so much more. Yet no foreign policy for the region and the world could be complete without addressing climate change, the single most important issue confronting our Pacific Ohana. That is why the bill includes authorizations for programs that will invest in climate change adaptation and climate resilient infrastructure to help spur sustainable development in the Pacific Islands. However, we know that sustainable development is not just about hard infrastructure, but is also built on focused investments in people and civil society. Our Blue Pacific Act includes programs to develop people-to-people relationships and promote civil society so that citizens are empowered to speak for themselves and participate in transformative change. I hope that some of the funding authorized to support civil society programs will go towards public-private partnerships tackling climate change and sustainable development like Hawaii Green Growth. Over the past 20 years, islands have really stepped up in the global dialogue on climate change and sustainable development. Part of that is because everyone recognizes that islands and their peoples are on the front lines of climate change. But I also believe that those of us who live on those islands have recognized that we have uniquely powerful perspectives to share about how to live and practice responsible stewardship of this giant island we call Earth in the vast ocean of space. We can underestimate neither the moral power of these island voices nor the moral imperative of speaking out and working together for the future of our homes. I want to thank all of you for being part of this conversation today and for your incredible leadership and service on behalf of our island homes. I am honored to share this space with you all today, and I stand with you in our shared fight for a sustainable future. Mahalo.
Thank you, Congressman Case. We're, as I mentioned, so delighted to work with Congressman Case, who has deep ties to Hawaii and a clear commitment to work with island nations. And I think what's important, at least for me, to hear from the Congressman is the commitment to engage and to consult and to understand what is locally and culturally appropriate to each place. He undertook a opportunity to listen to what was important as he put together that bill. So we are deeply grateful for his leadership. I also do want to take the opportunity to share remarks from Governor David Ige, who's our 8th governor in the state of Hawaii. And he is actually very focused through his Sustainable Hawaii Initiative and through the Aloha Plus Challenge in moving the state towards 100% renewable energy, looking at remodeling public school education, and preparing students for the 21st century innovation economy. And so we're really delighted to have his leadership and his support for the voluntary local review. And I would like to now share a video from Governor David Ige.
Each other. We see the challenges of collective action to make the needed changes to respond to this pandemic. Our actions can ensure that we emerge stronger, more equitable, and more resilient. Hawaii is committed to doing its part to achieve these global goals through consistent engagement with our local community and the international community, especially our partners in the Pacific region. We are the most isolated and most populated island community on the planet, 2,500 miles from the nearest landmass, and we see the impacts of climate change and sea level rise in a very real way, from hurricanes to wildfires, coral bleaching, king tides, and flooding rains. These impacts are happening each and every day. So as an island economy, sustainability is not simply a goal, it's a responsibility. Or as we say in Hawaii, it is our kuleana. We are connected to everything that we do, connected as a family, connected to our neighbors, and connected to our environment. Knowing this, we must go beyond merely caring for what exists now. We must protect the environment for our children, for their future. In Hawaii, we embarked on a journey to define a common set of goals for our many stakeholders to become more sustainable. We brought state and local government, our federal partners, businesses, nonprofits, community organizations, all together to identify common goals and the metrics we would agree to pursue them. Together, we identified goals on clean energy, local food production, watershed protection, invasive species control, green workforce and education, and smart, sustainable communities grounded in incorporating our host culture's values and over 1,000 years of indigenous wisdom and practices. We call this effort the Aloha Plus Challenge to push ourselves to achieve these goals with aloha. And as a state senator in 2014, I sponsored the bill endorsing and supporting the Aloha Plus Challenge. As governor in 2016, I was honored to host the International Union for Conservation of Nature's World Conservation Congress here in Hawaii. With over 10,000 delegates from 192 countries, my administration set the stage to place Hawaii at the forefront of sustainability with the Sustainable Hawaii Initiative. Hawaii was the first state to enact a law that aligns with the Paris Agreement and the first state in the country to commit to 100% clean renewable energy for electricity by 2045, which many other states like California soon followed. We also have committed to protecting 30% of our priority watersheds because we know that fresh water starts in our watersheds. We've committed to effectively managing 30% of our nearshore waters with established management areas. And we've committed to protecting our rich biodiversity against invasive species through the first comprehensive biosecurity strategy, because if left unchecked, it could cost billions of dollars in economic losses. Now, as a recognized local 2030 hub, Hawaii is taking action on the global goals through our local SDG framework, the Aloha Plus Challenge, and is measuring our progress through an open data dashboard with community-driven metrics and indicators to hold ourselves accountable. This year, I'm proud Hawaii will be the first US state to report our progress on the UN Sustainable Development Goals through our voluntary local review, which includes the work of our counties, businesses, and local community. This first of its kind report can help raise the bar for local SDG leadership across the United States and the world. And we are glad to join other cities and nations globally in taking this important step. These are our core sustainability goals, and with the economic impacts that we are experiencing from COVID-19, we are doubling down on our clean energy economy, protecting our natural resources, creating green jobs and education pathways, and building smarter, more sustainable communities. While we look to chart where we go post-COVID, having the voluntary local review gives us the opportunity to reflect on what we have accomplished to date, take our bearings, and chart a course for better Hawaii that we all want to see, as I'm sure other leaders like yourselves are doing. As we all know, the climate crisis is here and affects all of us, and we must find ways to come together. The United Nations is that promise. The SDGs are our common language. Through the alignment of local, state, national, and international action, we can align our canoes in the same direction to help each other arrive at a more sustainable, equitable world for all of us. Mahalo for this opportunity to share these thoughts with you today. Aloha.
Thank you so much, Celeste, for that opening remarks and really giving us a history of all that has happened and how islands have always inspired one another, and those islands inspired each other through those ideas that then become, in ways, initiatives between the islands that then create new institutions to be able to really reflect the vision and the values and the voice of the people. Also, those proclamations are amazing to see the way we've been able to coordinate from the community to the city to the capital to make sure that we're all speaking that common language of sustainable development goals. And also, in a way, it reinforces our island roots, the values that are important to all of our host cultures. And then it reminds me as well of behind those proclamations, it's all the important meetings of the education group, the working group, as well as the public policy group, and also the metrics measuring group. It's all people working together not just at a VLR once a year, but throughout that time, building that culture of sustainability and maintaining that. We're now going to move to our panel, and it's an exciting panel. And I'd like to first introduce Kate Brown. She's the Executive Director of the Global Island Partnership. And Kate is a passionate advocate for islands who is valued and trusted international partnership and collaboration leader. Also like to introduce Celeste again briefly and thank her for her opening remarks. Celeste, of course, is the Executive Director of Hawaii Green Growth and the Local 2030 Hub, and also recognize Jess Robbins, the founder and director of Tasmanian Way. And her mission is to help Tasmanians and islanders transition to a low carbon and sustainable future. Jessica was previously based in New York City, where I was very happy to meet her often with the Global Island Partnership. And she's connected locally and globally, working with Tasmanian Leaders, Inc. and the Micronesian Challenge. I'd like to begin my first question for Kate. Kate, I was wondering, LISPA's been involved behind the scenes as a network supporting the Micronesian, Caribbean, and Aloha Plus challenges. Can you tell us a bit about what each of these are and how we're moving forward with them?
Yeah, I think, firstly, thank you very much. I'm an Australian citizen. I lived in Australia for quite a while, and so it's really great to be on this webinar. And I think it's important, maybe up until about 10 years ago, I worked in the Pacific on biodiversity conservation across all of 21 Pacific Island countries. And one of the kind of constant issues that was brought up was that there was no kind of political leadership or political support for a lot of the actions that people, both in organizations and in government agencies, were trying to undertake on conservation, on sustainable livelihoods, and on a lot of these issues that we're talking about today. And I think that's kind of why our partnership was created. So we were created in 2006 with the idea to focus on mobilizing political leadership to support, funding, to support action, and to really embed these things that need to be dealt with over the long term. They're not projects, they're long-term initiatives that islands are signing up to kind of embed them in the way that islands move forward. And so at the time that we were founded, so we were founded by two political leaders from Seychelles and Palau to try and help islands work together to mobilize political leadership and to get commitments to happen. We worked together with the leaders of Micronesia to launch in 2006 something called the Micronesia Challenge. And you can see there's a common naming system happening. And Micronesia Challenge was the first kind of multi-country political commitment in the Pacific focused on conservation and sustainable livelihoods. And it was 5 political leaders agreeing to really take action in a very specific space. LISPA kind of evolved to looking more at the issue of sustainability. And in about 2007, the Caribbean, 8 Caribbean islands came together and did something called the Caribbean Challenge, or the Caribbean Challenge Initiative. And then around 2011, we started working with Hawaii on the idea of looking more broadly at the issue of sustainability. So not just conservation, not just kind of marine protected areas or invasive species, but the idea of island sustainability. And each of these are kind of multi-country political commitments supported by resource mobilization and are really innovative. And we're kind of the glue behind all of them that kind of connects them together. So a lot of the people involved in these initiatives are part of GLISPA. And I think what's really powerful about that is it's this idea of islands, island-led solutions. So each of them at the time that they were announced, we're doing something really innovative. And at the moment, it's Hawaii's time to be doing something really innovative, but I really encourage Tasmania to be the next kind of one coming down the pike. Each of them makes it their own and makes it something different that works in their local context, but they have really similar kind of ingredients around political leadership, learning from each other and this constant iteration, and doing something that really makes a difference to the people of each of these places. And I think those are the critical things. I think the exciting thing about Hawaii is it's enabled us to really focus on SDG implementation in an island context and network very much focused on finding the early leaders on SDG implementation. And so we'll continue to build the momentum and this kind of big wave of island leaders. I was just on a webinar this morning with islands from Africa, the Mediterranean, Europe, and the Americas. And it was really interesting. A lot of the people speaking on that were saying that this is really the time for islands, that things are really coming together. And people are looking, not just islanders, but even mainland places and large countries are looking to islands for the solutions. And so, you know, we need to be very much part of driving what those solutions are.
So much, Kate. And it's definitely true. Hawaii has been recognized for its leadership, and HEG is now a local 2030 hub. Celeste, can you tell us about the hub that you facilitate and what it does to steward the Aloha Plus Challenge moving forward?
Absolutely. Josh, thank you for the question. You know, I think the hub, what Kate is describing really demonstrates this long-term commitment to people and the process. And it's really not limited to just a particular program, right? So if we invest in people and people are connected to each other, that's really resiliency at its core. And what the hub does is although I shared a lot about the dashboard, essentially, as we said, you know, the rubber hits the road at the local level. And it's about the relationships that are developed in the process of developing the metrics and indicators. And data by itself is generally meaningless, but data that actually reflects things that are meaningful to the community is actually critically important. I would also say the thing that Kate talked about as well is critically important. This where GLISPA has been leading, and we look forward to working with Tasmania and others, is on political leadership. So it's the political leadership of the hub that we have this support, the buy-in, the engagement from all 4 counties, all 4 mayors, the governor, the state legislature, and our business and community leaders. So that's the buy-in. So the when we talk about the hub, how do we measure success? You know, I provided an earlier example. Can we actually help put people back to work in a time of COVID where there is lots of disruption? You know, and the work that we're doing with the Oahu Economic Development Board and different folks, Sultan Ventures Group on the CARES funding that was announced by the governor last week and now integrated into different strategic plans, which is exciting, such as the Hawaii Tourism Authority just launched its 5-year strategic plan prior to COVID, but is more relevant than ever as it's actually helping to frame recovery, but it's also framed around the Aloha Plus Challenge and the Sustainable Development Goals. So it's the hub itself convenes. We facilitate a conversation in a trust environment. We steward these goals. We find opportunities for partners to really implement and then to move the dial, and then we track the progress, and then we repeat, right? And so we also try to look at attracting resources from outside of Hawaii to resource the work of the working groups. Functionally, we have 3 working groups: a policy and legislative working group, a next gen local global leadership working group, the measures and dashboard working group, and our sustainability business forum. That's actually how the process that we keep to continue the discussion, to continue the iteration. It's not a one-off stakeholder engagement process. We convene as a hub around 50 meetings a year with our network, but also globally. And we'll talk a little bit more about that with the island network. This year, we were delighted that we're serving as a regional facilitator for North America for the upcoming UN Environment Assembly for UNEP. And this is significant because this indicates to us that UNEP, that the United Nations, they want Hawaii, they want local government, they want indigenous knowledge and wisdom at the top table. And so these are different ways that the hub is working both locally and globally to basically create the space to work across traditional sectors and silos. And the final thing I'll say on that is that we find that the best innovation, the best ideas come from those, what I call the in-between spaces, between the individual and the institution, between the public and the private sector, between the individual and the collective, I should say. And that's the space that we work on in. It's the in-between spaces to drive collective action and to create shared value.
I agree. I mean, many of the meetings, it's the conversation we have as we're leaving and discussing and inspired by each other throughout those working groups that really do inspire us to the next meeting, come with more ideas. Jess, I was going to ask you if you could share with us some of the challenges and bright spots on what Tasmania is doing to implement the SDGs.
Thank you so much, Josh. And I hope my internet's working okay. It just went a little bit unstable. Perfect. Excellent. So yeah, so my name's Jess Robbins, and I've been working to start up an initiative called the Tasmanian Way, which is all about bringing visibility to what Tasmanians are doing in the transition to a sustainable future, so that we can really create a Tasmanian response to the Sustainable Development Goals. And it's been very much, inspired from what Hawaii is doing and other islands around the world. So I returned actually 4 years ago to Tasmania, bringing with me a global island worldview, and really seeing that opportunity of how some of the world's smallest places can inspire massive change, and that we can be really ambitious in what we're doing. So to me, it was really obvious that Tasmanians this amazing hidden jewel of sustainability. We actually have got 4 years of carbon neutrality and this really strong foundation of sustainability. We're over 90% renewable with 100% commitment by 2022. And just recently, the government's actually launched a 200% renewable electricity commitment by 2040. So, we also have, more than half of our island protected and over 60,000 years of lived connection to Lutruwita, Tasmania, which places us as one of the oldest living places on Earth. So we have some amazing credentials, but we're really very far from really being that utopian place or example of sustainability. So, when you arrive in Hobart or in Tasmania, you're really going to be picked up by a fossil fuel vehicle. You may likely see some log trucks cruising through the main streets of Hobart with some pretty old trees on the back of them. And, this is a sign of very much our long and very fraught and divided history between protection of nature and development. So it's still very much, a part of who we are and still very hotly polarizing topics and debates here. So also in coming back, I've realised that, and listening to a lot of Tasmanians talk about our sustainability credentials, I've really heard that Tasmanians don't really want to be false prophets. We've got some really big problems, and we really want to make sure that in stepping forward globally and what we're doing locally is really genuine and really building on what we do. But what I see is also when I head out for dinner, for example, like I always see that, we've got these menus which are filled with amazing local produce which is grown locally. You'd be served a delicious glass of wine that is probably from one of our casually carbon neutral vineyards or completely off the grid vineyards. And they'll also be some of the best in the world. So we've got these really genuine and very authentic examples of these artisanal producers and that are going to be your mates and that are really working hard and to create these amazing examples of these low impact and locally produced products. So, also, I guess in that sort of broader context, what we're also seeing is that it is often some of the cities as well that are really leading some fantastic goals and transitions. So in Hobart, where I am at the moment, there's a zero waste by 2030 goal, which is introduced by the city. We ban single-use plastics. In the north, in Launceston, they have quietly announced a carbon neutral goal by 2025 and are working really to become a city of gastronomy to really sort of draw attention to that need for local food and also connectedness of, good water and waste. So there's a whole bunch of bright spots across Tasmania. And when we look at actually putting those together, we really start to see this growing momentum, right? This natural transition point towards this low carbon sustainable future. So we can actually start seeing the bigger things happening. So, as Kate mentioned earlier, like these islands, as islands, we can be these amazing leaders in solutions. We can be these laboratories of change. And I certainly see that for Tasmania, as a population of 500,000 people and quite a stable place, both from a geopolitically and from a climate and perspective. So we are also really capable of making these really rapid changes. And so I think there's just this enormous opportunity for Tasmania. And one, I think that there is a growing number of people seeing that we can really be genuine leaders in this really transition to a more sustainable future.
Thank you so much, Jess, and really authentic, awe-inspiring examples that make me really want to come visit. And I think that's the point of really what GLISPA is doing and Local 2030 hubs. It's sharing what's working, and they're genuine examples of good governance, but how we can get together with one another and then learn from that and then keep inspiring each other and just building even more momentum. Kate, I was wondering about the Local 2030 Islands Network. And I know it's based on the ideas of islands working with other islands. Can you share some more examples and bright spots and exciting examples of what's going on that build on Jess's?
Yeah, so we have, as I said, we launched a new network, kind of building on what Hawaii's done, the dashboard and the whole process, the setting of local goals, etc., and the political leadership side of things. We kind of created 4 principles that an island could adopt or should adopt if they're going to be part of this Local 2030 Islands Network. So it's, setting local goals and targets. It's having some method for measuring progress. So it could be something like the dashboard. It's creating some type of public-private partnership, an entity that can actually support this work. So not the government, not an NGO, but something that sits between that. Some kind of independent in some ways entity that's not implementing things but is facilitating this process, and then finally engaging political leadership. So those are kind of the key principles. In terms of bright spots, so we have already engaged 8 islands in the network, and then we also have a steering committee. The 8 islands that are engaged are islands like Ireland, so the country of Ireland, who is really trying to engage on SDG implementation and has its own set of things that it is sharing within the network. We have Guam. Guam actually was inspired by Hawaii and started something called Guam Green Growth about 1.5 years ago. They're an early leader in the network through the governor and the lieutenant governor there. And just in September, they had an event really launching the action plan for Guam Green Growth. And they're meeting weekly. They want to do a dashboard. They're innovating. They've created a local makerspace. There's just a lot going on in Guam, and I think I would really like to recognize it. And we see very similarly that in Curacao, one of the other islands that are very engaged in what we're doing, we are continuing to build out the Local 2030 Island Network. I think it's really exciting, and it's specifically focused on SDG implementation, all of the stuff along the principle side of things, less, it's not something focused on transport or anything, but it's how do we actually do this big, ambitious process for determining what our future will look like. And one of the things we're really aware of with the Sustainable Development Goals is we have until 2030 really to make significant progress. What we want to see is islands really being at the forefront of that progress, showing what they can do. And we see a huge amount of examples of that. And I think one of the things, and I think Hawaii, Celeste didn't talk to this, but we've started to see that Hawaii is being used by the United States, the whole country, as an example of SDG process and implementation. For us, that's really exciting. But yeah, we see lots of islands that could join this network as long as they agree to these principles, and we start continuing to create kind of this magic, really.
Thank you so much, Kate. And I know Celeste also addressed this as well about COVID and building back better and beauty and balance. Jess, can you share about islands across the world being severely affected by COVID's related disruption? How has COVID affected Tasmania, and how can the network you're building help the island build back better?
Sure. So I mean, for the Australians on this webinar, so Tasmania was very much the original cluster outbreak when COVID first started to spread in Australia. We were then sort of very much sadly sort of masked out by the impacts of Victoria and now South Australia. But, you know, in Tasmania, what we did do was we really used our island advantage and shut down our borders, rallied as a community, and we've now been COVID-free for over 100 days. So we're in the easing, which has been easing restrictions now with travel just restarting. So that's exciting and also is a little bit concerning, and we, you know, we're quite aware of our vulnerabilities at the moment. So during the lockdown, a group of colleagues and friends actually came together with me, and we started talking about, okay, so what can we do in this moment in time? And we realized that, you know, there was a huge amount of course activity happening within people's businesses, you know, government and loads of people also taking various actions that they could. And we looked at saying, well, actually, how is it that we could really play a role in connecting Tasmanians together in this moment to not only think about what COVID has shown us, but also how is it that we can really bring Tasmanians together to ask about how it is that we can emerge stronger and emerge to thrive. So we ended up bringing together 150 Tasmanians in a virtual online event using a strengths-based approach called appreciative inquiry. And we really started to ask these, you know, positive questions. What it did was to really help people, well, see that they actually had a role to play in the recovery process. And through being involved in these breakout groups and discussions, we're actually able to really lift their sights beyond the day-to-day and into actually having that conversation about, oh, what is it that I can do to actually help Tasmania to recover and start to put in place these things in my business or in my community that can help us transition to a more sustainable place. And so it was a really positive and very productive moment in time. What we really heard through this conversation was really that focus on the need for Tasmania, not only just to transition in renewable electricity, but really that we really want to be socially inclusive, that we really want to embrace our long and rich history of more than 60,000 years to shape our future, that we really need to tackle these big literacy issues that Tasmania is well known for within Australia, and really using technology, innovation and systems thinking to really transition to being a thriving place. So next month we'll actually hold a second conversation which will focus on how, on what the bright spots are that people are putting in place for 2021 and beyond to build up one of these maps around the action that people are taking. And this is very much all learning from, you know, what Hawaii's done, what the Global Island Partnership has done by saying, look, if we can really bring people together in our community, we can start to actually get clear about actually what our high ambition goals are. And then we can start to really build those coalitions and partnerships of people that are really participating in making change and enabling people to make a bigger change themselves in the communities that they care about. So that's part of what's been happening in terms of the Tasmanian Way. And, you know, there's also just been some really fantastic work as well from state government to individual organisations that are taking place. So we just really want to bring visibility to that and elevate it as much as we can.
I think the deliberations and the dialogue are actually some of the most amazing parts. We held films from the Hawaii International Film Festival that were short films, and they all talked about self-reliance and resilience. And by watching the short movie and talking afterwards, it kept everyone socially distanced but connected, but also thinking what next. And it was exciting to see everyone having that exchange and then being able to be empowered, and the ideas that came out of it really were amazing. And we also know that we have the ideas, but we also have the answers. And I was on another panel, as Kate was talking about, from Fiji, and they were saying, we know now that the land and the ocean is always what's provided for us, and we have to cherish it because that will then be an important natural resource and a life source for the future. And so I think it's really important point to hear what you're doing with the Tasmanian Way. Celeste, can you tell us a little bit more about the Aloha Plus dashboard and the 4 principles of the local 2030 Islands Network?
Yeah, absolutely, Josh. I think Kate touched on the 4 principles a bit, which is, it's actually really important to have those identify those local goals, right? Time-bound goals, and which can help strengthen the long-term political leadership. Because I think one thing to note is that climate change and sustainability and resilience are inherently long-term value propositions, or are long-term value propositions inherently out of sync with short-term political cycles. It's very important when you look at the Tasmania Way, GLISPA as a partnership, and Hawai'i Green Growth, and we're seeing Guam Green Growth. The actual network of people is bigger than any one political leader. But on the other side, political leadership is being able to say, oh, that is actually a unique platform, and I can see my ambitions, my political commitments, and how I can help implement that through that framework. And so it's worth noting that we've transitioned the Aloha Plus Challenge and the dashboard through 2 governors, through 4 mayors, and we are delighted that we have some new mayors that are coming on board. And so it's constantly looking at how you continue the work beyond these political cycles. That's the power of the partnership. And I think that's something that's incredibly unique about the hub, about the work that we're doing through the network. It's not just focused on one political leadership. Local municipality, local government, critically important, state government, national leadership, but the political leadership then works with the public-private partnership. That's the second pillar that we talk about. Strong public-private partnerships that can actually really help then integrate these priorities into policy and planning. Then we'll get to the measurement, right? Measuring and evaluation. How do you actually know you're making progress? What are the gaps? That was really the revealing thing about the voluntary local review and the 2020 benchmark report and the video that we shared. It's just clear, we might be closer to reaching our clean energy goal by 2030. We're much farther off when we look at something like our ocean stewardship goal. We're at a 7% of a 30% nearshore marine management goal. And that needs to help mobilize action. And it can't just be like looking around, to Jessica's point, to say, hey, whose responsibility is that? Or as we say in Hawaii, whose kuleana is that? We identify the folks that have the kuleana and the responsibility in our network. We support them, but people need to feel that call to action. And they need to be enabled to feel like their individual action actually does make a difference. That's also the value of the dashboard. What's really unique in Hawaii is that we've actually further localized the dashboard. And we have now sort of county level dashboards. We have the Kauai Aloha Plus Challenge, the Maui Aloha Plus Challenge, City and County of Honolulu. And what that is, it goes to that point. What can I as an individual do? How can I track progress? How can I hold myself accountable? I can reduce my water use. I can take cleaner transportation choices. I can look at purchasing local food. I can put that data into the localized dashboard that will roll up to the statewide dashboard and then reflect action against the Sustainable Development Goals. And we're really delighted to be working with Esri on that data, interoperability, how the community calendar helps us. We have a future vision for the dashboard that I wake up in the morning and instead of going to my news, I click on the dashboard and say, hey, what's going on today in sustainability? What's that community convening that's happening to discuss a watershed project? Where can I buy local? What can I do? What are my transportation options? That's how we want this, because according to the science, we have 10 years to avoid the most catastrophic impacts of climate change. That's going to require behavior change across every sector of our society, engaging every individual. And you really, therefore, need to understand where we are. We need to understand the data, and we need to have the opportunities available to us. The fourth and final pillar, I would say, of the network is on those concrete initiatives, those specific actions that are locally and culturally appropriate. I also just want to stress what you and Kate and others said. Islands really do have the solutions. We have major economy islands on the call too. That's so exciting, because it doesn't mean that we come from different geographic scales, scopes, sizes, and we can all work together. That's the value of the Global Island Partnership. That's what we bring through the network. And it's because our scale is our size is our asset. We can more quickly innovate around water, energy, food nexus projects. We can more quickly see solutions emerge that have global relevancy, that can be scalable. And this is really the quickest way to figure out how we work on both adaptation and mitigation. In Hawaii, for example, we have a 100% clean energy goal that our businesses are behind, government, our civil society. We have ambitious climate goals. We were the first state by statute to sign up to the Paris Agreement, as we heard from Governor Ige. So we have the combination of high-level political commitment and actual opportunities to innovate around those in an island context. And if major economies more broadly, continental US and others, adopt island-led solutions, we'll more quickly get to where we actually need to be before the end of the decade. The final point I would just make, that we are talking about a very unique thing here. This is a partnership approach. We're talking about islands inspiring other islands, islanders inspiring other islanders. This is nothing at all about this is top down. We're learning from each other's experience. It's collaborative, and it's not a top down model. It's not prescriptive. It's not a consultation that takes place other than a collaboration. It's a unique model, and we need more of that, because unless we actually have that approach, unless we approach these things, as Jessica so eloquently outlined, listening and understanding, we're going to struggle actually to really see the solutions emerge that we need.
Celeste, thank you so much. I mean, and you root everything in aloha, but then you point out how we have to move on that spiritual value base towards action. And I think the way you talked about the dashboard, it's true, it's what you'd wake up to see what's going on. And I can see the community coming alive in that. I can see where people now would, in a way, it's also how islands are nimble and how we can nudge the needle to encourage each other to do more. And also, I really want to thank you for bringing up how imminent climate crisis is. It is the existential threat. And according to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, but more importantly, it's what we see every day around us in the islands, that we have really a decade. And if the world does not change its behavior, there will be catastrophic consequences, not only for the islands. We might be the first, but it'll impact everyone on our island Earth. So I really appreciate you for showing how the dashboard can also be an element of accountability where people can look and see. And it's also openness that government doesn't always have. And so that's an important part of the partnership, to bring everyone. And then definitely, I would say, before I ask Kate the final question, it's also SDG 17. We're redefining partnerships, not being just some aid agency coming from somewhere, but together learning and working with one another. And I remember being at the Paris negotiations, and it was Pacific Islanders talking about what they need most to be able to move forward. And it was working with Baka and having the canoes like Hokulea. And that's really the living library, but also the model of how we move forward. And those canoes were the ones that are able to sometimes come as the first place after a huge typhoon and other cyclones hitting our island. So we really do have all the solutions. And I know we could keep going and we'll move on to the questions, but Kate, I wanted to ask you one final one. Can you share how more islands can get involved with the local 2030 Islands Network?
Yeah, well, firstly, we encourage islands to get involved. And in fact, as you can see, we have kind of a very broad diversity of islands involved. The key is to agree to the principles, to want to implement the SDGs or sustainability in your island context. Yeah, there's islands that Australia works with, and I have been at an event where an Australian leader has called Australia an island. So, but the way to get involved is look at the principles, contact us on info@local2030.org. In fact, that might be incorrect. What did I just say? Islands2030.org, sorry. We also have a website, which is islands2030.org. And you'll see there kind of who else is involved. There's a way to contact us also through that, but also
I'll just maybe pick up and share
in
just,
your
oh yeah, there's share. There you are, Kate.
own
Celeste, if you want to try to continue, and then we'll come back to Kate.
I think Kate covered it, you know, and we have that in the chat. We just really welcome islands from all different scales and scopes. It's a political commitment. It's a commitment to action and to actually both track progress, to show areas where we can collaborate. And as I, you know, I think we're going to hear from Kate in a minute. I think we put the information in the chat.
Local context.
Gotta love Kate's persistence, that's for sure. And so I really do want to thank Kate, Celeste, and Jessica for giving examples. I'm more excited about visiting Hobart now than ever to see some of those examples. And I know it's really by living those examples, we really can redefine SDG 17. We're now going to move to questions, and there's been some amazing comments already, and we'll try to follow those. We've received many great questions already. We want to encourage the audience members to continue directing questions to the panelists through the Q&A box. At this time, we also invite audience members to actively participate in the discussion. Audience members, what sustainability challenges and COVID-related disruptions are your islands facing? Do you also have bright spots that you want to share with other islands that maybe we can learn from one another in addressing these challenges? So please send your comments to the chat box. And I think Celeste, you saw one already that you wanted to comment on.
Oh, let's see. Yeah, I'm looking at these. Let's see. I'm trying to pull them up, Josh, if you wanted to paraphrase.
No,
Let's see.
I can go to one while you're trying to find it. I just saw it
great.
before the other one's clicked up. It was a great example talking about education and how education is an important space and looking at charter schools and SDGs and curriculum. And I would agree.
I
what
agree.
we've been doing at university is we've created a whole new class that was just called Global Issues. And for 16 weeks, we did one of the SDGs every week. And the students actually did, their final project was identifying what are the promising practices of each goal and creating a map of look how great everything is. Then where are we not doing so well? But what are simple steps to improve and what lessons did they learn from other islands and around the world? And then finally, scalable solutions. And so I agree that I think charter schools and immersion schools are a great way to move forward. And on the immersion school side, we just completed indigenizing the SDGs. So we did them all in Olelo, Hawai'i with Kanaka designs for each one because their humu humu nuku nuku apua'a doesn't look so good. It's like a goldfish for 14. So we brought local students to design those, and we've then completed that. And we've also done local versions of the SDGs. And I'll hand it over to Celeste.
Yeah, I agree. And Josh, you've been actually leading some really great and exciting work in this area. I have to make an important point though, and you've heard me say this before. The solutions, especially students and youth growing up in an island context, is that they inherently understand sustainability. I've had many opportunities. I've been so lucky to speak with younger generation. I myself, as a former faculty member, I've never had to explain sustainability to the youth, to younger generations. They understand it inherently. Further, I would say kids growing up, keiki as we say in Hawaii, growing up in an island context, inherently understand that what happens in their upper watershed affects the coral reef and everything in between. You just grow up in that island context, Mauka to Makai, ridge to reef. And then with indigenous knowledge and wisdom that dates back 1,000 years on how that relationship is inherently different with nature, it's familial. And it's that connection that Hawaii has embraced more broadly that is actually so valuable. Now, when we talk about large-scale SDG implementation, I should have clarified from the beginning that Hawaii Green Growth, we were not invited to become a United Nations hub for SDGs because of our aspiration to sign on to the SDGs. We were invited because of our local framework that is grounded in indigenous knowledge and wisdom that predates the SDGs. And when we talk to the youth, therefore, it's not teaching them when we bring SDGs and local frameworks into curriculum, which we should do, I agree, it's not teaching them about sustainability, but rather creating the right framework, the right platform, the right policy platforms to enable their voices to come forward and be heard. And that's actually what's important. The other thing too, depending on what year we're teaching, it really comes down to identity. The SDGs, how can they see their identity in those goals? And if they can understand their identity through that process, then you have the transformational change. That's how we're going to support the next generation of sustainability leaders, is by enabling them to find their own voice, their own context, and communicate that at a global level. So I agree with what you're saying. It has to be bottom up to the top. It has to be locally driven.
Yeah, and I think really what you mentioned, Celeste, it's also, it's not top down, it's horizontal. And it's definitely a human rights-based approach where it's based on respect, and that trust comes after working together. Jess, did you have something? I thought you were moving forward.
Only to say that I'm reading one of the different questions actually, and probably almost responding to that, which was around embracing some of the Indigenous knowledge, particularly in Tasmania, and recognition of the very dark past that has been in Tasmania. There's been, the only war with a capital W in Australia is the Black Wars that took place in Tasmania. We are in a really different place in where we start our conversation about coming together and embracing where we are. We have been a really polarized community, and so what we're trying to do in terms of with the Tasmanian Way and others is looking at how it is that we can really start bringing people together to unpack what that shared common things are, so that we're not actually coming into to conflict, but really looking at making sure that we can have the opportunity to have our elders from the Aboriginal community around the table, our young, people as well, together with our heads of industry and business and government, so that we all start to really embrace that we actually have the capacity to all take action to really shape our future.
Thank you so much, Jess. And I also want to address that. I know Kawohi was worried if we would look at that. And one example of what we did is we took the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples and adopted it in Hawaii before the UN did as well, just as Celeste likes to talk about. Sometimes we're ahead of that. And that declaration was in its entirety, not with Article 46 with some restrictions. And I think that's a very important point, that we all have to look at that. And I thank you, Jess, for also addressing it. And I know Kawohi also talked about experiencing the aloha in Hawaii and that respect. And I think that's one thing that we all have to work on. And I think the UN Declaration in a way provides at least a framework and a roadmap of how we can move forward in mutual respect. And those are some of those points. Catherine, is a new senior fellow at the Office of High Commissioner for Human Rights and an amazing Maori advocate. She says, right now in Aotearoa, local governments are deciding to create Maori wards, constituencies, to ensure we have more elected officials influencing decision-making. Is this an issue in the cases spoken about today? Is there parallel campaigns along with SDG transformation to raise that Indigenous voice in local bodies? And any advice for us, because we still have lots of racism structural and in different communities, because this potentially undermines rapid SDG work that might otherwise get done. Is there anyone that would like to respond to Catherine about what's going on in Aotearoa? I think in some ways, that's also the model, and Jess, please jump in when you want to. When we look at each other and we see what's going on, we try to find that bright spot and then build on that. And of course, if you look at the election going on in this country, what that election looks amazing, as well as a foreign minister that reflects the strong women's leadership, as well as a Maori vision. And that's quite important, but we all know how much more work there is. And I know one model that Hawaii is also interested in is what's going on with the recognition of Wanganui with rivers and mountains, and if that's a way forward. So I think that exchange about how we deal with the past that Jess was talking about, rooted in a rights-based approach, but then also understanding we have to move forward so fast to solve this existential climate crisis. It's not mutually exclusive. In fact, recognizing Indigenous rights and the wisdom and values then really allow us to accomplish that greater. But Jess?
Yeah, and also I'd say from in Tasmania, I'm not aware of these sorts of a push locally within the local councils or state. However, certainly on across Australia, there's the Uluru Statement from the Heart, which is really looking at how to include an Indigenous voice into Parliament in a more permanent basis. So yeah, so there are different moves, and I think there is always a lot to learn, right, from different communities, from New Zealand, from across the Pacific and around the world to how we make sure that there are these genuine voices and ability for particularly, you know, minority group, particularly like our original First People and those that have been, you know, through extreme trauma over their long histories, to rectify that.
Thank you so much. And I see Celeste, you responded to the question about the SDG focusing on health, good health and well-being, but also connecting it to, of course, the Aloha Plus dashboard and what we have there.
Yeah, you know, I think it's interesting when the SDGs were agreed, and actually I should say, you know, I've been working on SDGs since 2009, if not earlier, and thinking about how do we emerge from the post MDG. I think there was a lot of debate, you know, not to rehash that, about how many goals you actually have, how it all fits together. But it was actually interesting. I do recall conversations at that time that we were developing the metrics and indicators, whether there should be a standalone health goal. And actually our health leaders at the time and experts said, actually, despite the desire to have that really stand out as a goal, to show the priority, they really thought we had to have it be tracked across all of these other 6 areas. Smart, sustainable communities, what's the intersection between health and transportation and walkability, local food, you know, how we eat and, you know, protect, you know, our food and our local sources, as well as natural resource management and actually education and green workforce. So I would say to the question, if you actually click on the dashboard and explore the data, and by the way, all the primary data is available behind even the primary indicators for those that just really want to wonk out on the data, you'll see that we are tracking quite a few health metrics, as well as just general, you know, economic development, which we think is critically important. So I think that goes into the intersection, and progress on one goal means that there needs to be progress on other goals as well.
Thank you so much. And I see we have a couple more questions, and I know we're coming up on our time. I'm putting my email in there to help answer some of those, but I think the Uluru Statement translated into Aloha Hawaii would be a great idea. I know they're doing it now into music as well, and it's being presented that way. We've always done our best to translate anything from the UN into Olelo Hawaii. And then of course we find out, of course, it existed centuries before and in a more deeper, profound sense. So that's kind of exciting. We're looking there at the Aloha Plus Challenge. I appreciate everyone's responses there, focusing on bringing back Indigenous voices. We definitely agree to that. And Jessica's also putting in her email and information about Tasmania Way, and so did Celeste. I want to thank all of you, especially our panelists, and all the amazing comments in the chat box. I definitely am going to go through them afterwards, and we have a lot to follow up on. We're coming on the end of the panel, and I want to invite each one of our panelists for 1 to 2 minutes of closing thoughts, and really want to thank all of the people for participating and sharing everything so far. Mahalo. Should we hand it over to Jess?
Sure thing, Josh. So yeah, thank you so much, Josh, for bringing us together today, and for ASFID. Great to always hear from Celeste and Hawaii Green Growth and Kate Brown as well with the Global Island Partnership. So look, I think that, you know, the more that we can connect, share, learn from each other, And also really importantly, right, in these times of disruption and global change and uncertainty, the more it is that we can really focus on the good news stories, the bright spot, what is working as part of our toolkit to really tackle the big issues and the big problems, then we have that optimism, that sense of hope and agency, which are really critical within our own, for our own mental health and well-being in motivating action. And so each of these individual to bigger changes, we really do see when we link that into the Sustainable Development Goals, we really start to see that whole global change as well. So thanks for drawing attention to what we're doing here.
Thank you. Celeste?
Yeah, I think the key message is that what we do on islands and the solutions that we develop together are globally relevant. And I might just quote, President Naplau Ramengasau, who said, we're all islanders on island Earth. And he said, help us, this is a speech he delivered to the United Nations, help us help you. Islands have been living in the reality of finite resources for their entire existence. And especially during the time of COVID, when we have to be innovative, we look at, basically tradition is the innovation in this case. And so islands are really emerging from this space in a great way to lead the global economy towards a recovery. So I think these types of conversations are great. I also want to thank ASFID for convening us today, and Josh for this conversation, and actually the questions to all the individual participants who actually asked these great questions. I look forward to collaborating with everyone on the panel. Thank you.
Thank you too. And I also want to thank AFSED. It's an honor to partner with you, and it's been great to move forward to discuss these issues. And I thought the point of tradition is the innovation is an excellent point. And the world had to come up with the Paris Agreement because they weren't listening. And it's a great idea when we see how we can organize as islands to hold the international institutions to be able to live up to the promise of the people. And that's where even what we're looking at, what we can do with locally determined contributions, as those will appear next year in Glasgow, as that's where most people would be at this time of the year. We can look at how we can move forward in that way and make sure that islands continue to provide that vision based on those values for a better world. Thank you so much, everyone. And we will also respond to many of the questions about the videos and try to share resources. And that's really what the Local 2030 Hub is. It's about sharing the positive examples and then being able to replicate those in our own unique ways with our own islands. So thank you again, everyone, and appreciate everyone for taking the time to being with us today. Mahalo.